We're very lucky to have him, Tom Boudreaux.
Thanks, Mike. I'm honored to be here. The only awkward thing, well, there are two. I'll share them with you beside the urinal on the wall. I'm sandwiched between two of the most fun, I'm sure, events at this year's PorcFest, beer and David Friedman, both of which have been very influential in my own life in different ways. David, unfortunately, I can't stick around for his talk. This is the second thing that's a bit awkward. I'd planned to make a whole series of days of it, but at George Mason just a few weeks ago, one of my colleagues got seriously ill and is hospitalized, looks like for the long term, and there was a class that needed to be taught, and so they came to me and they said, will you teach the class? And I was really the only person who could do it because all my other colleagues had escaped before I did. So I said, sure, and that caused my plans to be screwed up. So I got to leave right after this presentation to drive to Burlington to get back to GMU tomorrow to teach. I'm a soldier for the cause, but I'm very happy to be here. Mike mentioned that I was president of the Foundation for Economic Education. I was from 1997 until 2001. That was a great honor. It's the granddaddy of free market libertarian think tanks. This presentation stems from a very distinct moment that I experienced while I was at FEE. We were having a discussion with some students, college-age students in the FEE library, which is in Irvington, New York, just up the river from Manhattan. And it's a beautiful leafy green area if you've never been there. And the day was beautiful like this. And the windows of the library were open. And the discussion, I forget the details, was going on about, you know, all the splendors of capitalism, you know, but well, back then they didn't have MP3 players, but you know, consumer electronics, flat screen TVs, jet travel, antibiotics, and one student said, you know, well, that's all fine and good, but you know, it's the price we pay is a much dirtier environment. And I was kind of, it was a serious comment. She was serious, and so I said, well, maybe, but what evidence do you have for that? And she turned around and she pointed to the outdoors, this leafy green area. She says, just the evidence is all around you. And I'm looking out and I'm seeing pretty much what I see here. Green trees, bright sunshine, clean air. And it dawned on me that people see, it's not unique to me, this insight, but people see largely what their priors tell them to see. This young woman saw around her a polluted, filthy, destructive, hazardous, perilous for the health world. And this bothered me for a while. I began to think about it. And then a few weeks later, I was in LaGuardia Airport, which is where the urinal comes in, because the insight for the talk, if it's an insight, came from standing at a urinal. Not that one, but I was at a urinal. So you can get pissed off at this talk if you like. I was at a urinal when I got the idea for what ultimately became this talk. I realized, you know, I'm in an airport bathroom, and if you pay attention to an airport bathroom next time you're there, you never have to touch anything but yourself. Right? It's a monument to cleanliness and sanitation. The entryways, well, I'll get to that. So I'm standing at the urinal. I mean, this itself is one of the many ways that capitalism has made our world cleaner. We do our business in a urinal or a toilet. It gets flushed away. We never see it. It gets sanitized. And so that clearly is one major advance over pre-industrial life that we enjoy. We live in a much cleaner world because of that. Of course, we take it for granted. It's part of our everyday life. We don't wake up in the morning and look at toilets and urinals and say, oh, thank goodness, a toilet and a urinal, right? But we should, because these things are although common to us, They're major advances. The vast majority of our ancestors didn't have these things. So moving on, I'm going to stick with the bathroom theme for a while, although I promise no potty language. So toilet paper speaks for itself. This is one of the many ways that capitalism makes our world cleaner. Yeah, maybe this stuff was produced, and in the production process, some extra carbon atoms, or molecules rather, were thrown into the environment. Perhaps, but that has to be weighed against the cleanliness and sanitation provided by clean toilet paper. Every roll is new. It hasn't been used for that purpose before. Soap, the vast majority of our ancestors never bathed with soap. Soap for ordinary people is a product of the modern industrial age. It's dirt cheap. Pardon the double entendre. It's dirt cheap. But we have it. We clean ourselves with it every day. When I lecture to my big class is a 328 student auditorium full of mostly freshmen, 18-year-olds, and I asked them toward the beginning of class if any of them if they bathed today. And of course they think I'm crazy, or showered, And of course they all bathe and shower. I said, well, you're lucky because the vast majority of your ancestors, nearly all of your pre-industrial ancestors, never showered, very seldom took a bath. They were filthy in their body, and hence they were dirty and really polluted. This is from a airport bathroom. I forget which airport, but you know the deal now. You wave your hand over that little infrared light, and the paper towel comes out, and then you throw the paper towel into an open-mouthed receptacle when you throw it away. This is probably the least visible picture, but I'll tell you what it is. This is pictures to the men's room and women's room at the Atlanta airport. I took this a few years ago, by the way, with my cell phone. Right? And so think of the typical airport bathroom. You don't have to touch a door. They have this little labyrinth at first, so you get to walk in, and it's big, so you can have your luggage on your back. You don't have to touch anything. You walk around, so no one can see in, but you don't have to touch a door to open it. You stand at the urinal, you go to the toilet, flushes itself. You stick your hand under the faucet, the water comes out. You wave your hand over even soap dispensers, that comes out too automatically now. You wave your hand over the paper dispenser, out comes the paper. You throw the paper into the open mouth dispenser. You've touched nothing but yourself, and you're able to wash your hands. It's a series of little innovations that keep us incredibly clean from bacteria in a way that our ancestors could not possibly have even dreamed of, much less realize. It's part of our everyday lives, but most people don't see it because it's too common. This is a photograph of underwear. Now, most of us wear underwear, and we don't think of underwear as, well, we don't think of underwear, unless you're in Victoria's Secret, but then the point is different. Underwear played a major role in sanitizing our world. The great Harvard economic historian David Landis, in his 1998 book, The Wealth and Poverty of Nations, has this passage where he describes the first effect of the Industrial Revolution in England in the 18th century. The first commodity that Industrial Revolution enabled ordinary men and women to buy. It wasn't kitchen ranges, it wasn't microwave ovens, it wasn't Wi-Fi. It was underwear. Prior to the industrial age, most people, again, 98% of the people, not counting the clergy and the nobility and the royalty, most people had just a few changes of clothing. They had no washing machines, so they couldn't wash the thing. They had no soap. They used those clothes over and over and over again. They worked in them. They slept in them. They didn't have underwear, and the bacterial pollution was enormous. Underwear, this was the first stuff that was affordable by ordinary men and women. This fabric, for the first time, was woven by machines. So for the first time in human history, we had machine woven fabric that could stand up to very, very vigorous pounding and washing. The homespun that our peasant ancestors, and we all are descended from peasant ancestors. The homespun that our peasant ancestors wore could not be washed vigorously. If you put that stuff into a modern washing machine, it would disintegrate. David, you just missed the compliment that I paid to you. You'll have to ask someone what it is. And so underwear emerged from, it was one of the first products emerged from the Industrial Revolution. Ordinary men and women could afford it. So for the first time, our peasant ancestors could keep clean fabrics between themselves and their clothing and help make them a lot cleaner. According to David Landis, the economic historian, it had a noticeable effect on mortality rates in the immediate aftermath of the advent of the Industrial Revolution. So we don't think of underwear as keeping us, as sanitizing our world. It does. This is the roof of my house, or part of the roof of my house. So how is a roof part of a way that capitalism or the industrial system keeps us more clean, less polluted than we otherwise would be? Unless you were a member of the nobility or high clergy prior to the industrial age, you almost surely lived in a house with a thatched roof. Thatched roof, of course, these things are made of earthen materials, sticks, twigs, branches, and they're tightly woven. They're designed to, as best as they can, keep moisture out, but this is all earthen material. And in that earthen material, we know this from historical records, in that earthen material, wasps, bees, hornets, flies, birds, they all nest in there. And so you have animals living in there, and animals do things. It's all dropping on you when you're sleeping under your thatched roof. The only upside of a thatched roof is they caught fire a lot. All right, so you can get rid of the birds and insects. Of course, you might get rid of yourself in the process. This is a hard roof. It's something completely common in the modern age, touched by capitalism. And yet, it's one of the ways, an important way, that we are protected from pollution. Not only is it much better at keeping out snow and rain and hail and sleet, it doesn't have animals living in the roof itself, defecating and dying and doing all the things they do to people living just below the roof. This is, it's hard to see this, this is a photograph taken with, again, my cell phone, looking out on my deck, but what I want you to see, although it's difficult to see, is the screen. Now, this is a vinyl screen. Most screens prior to vinyl, when I was young, they were made of some metal, maybe tin or aluminum. The wire mesh screen was not invented until sometime in the late 19th or very early 20th century. Of course, now we have air conditioning. I'll get to that in a moment. But on bright, beautiful days like this, you might not want air conditioning. You want to leave the window open, let the fresh air in. The trouble is, if you don't have screens, if you let the fresh air in, you also let the fresh flies and other insects in. The screen kept indoor dwellings, for the first time, free of flies and other insects, relatively free of flies and other insects, while at the same time allowing what we would consider to be proper ventilation. H.L. Mencken, the great journalist and scholar of the early and mid-20th century, has an essay, I believe it's entitled Two Unknown Heroes, or Two Unsung Heroes. And he details his life growing up in Baltimore. He was born in 1880 and lived all of his life in Baltimore. And he recalls his childhood as a time when the summers were oppressively hot and miserable. And in part, according to Mencken, and it's certainly believable, this was before the wire mesh screen was available. And so it was brutally hot outside. Of course, air conditioning hadn't even been invented yet. That wasn't invented, I think, until 1902. And if you open the windows, the bugs come in. And if you close the windows to keep the bugs out, you're in stifling heat. It's a pretty bad choice. So Mencken was just thrilled with the wire mesh screen. Something we take for granted, but it's an important way that the industrial process keeps our lives less polluted than they would otherwise be. Bottled water. There's some back there. It's for sale. Not only is the plastic important, I'll talk about that in a moment, but potable water, which we take for granted, either out of our faucets or in bottles, was not a particularly common element in the pre-industrial age. The small beer was the routine drink, even for young children. Beer, I'm not sure exactly the process, but somehow it was, I don't know if it was the alcohol, I don't know if it was the actual production of the beer, but the bacteria were killed. Drinking water, the way we drink water today, was not something that our pre-industrial ancestors did. They did not have inexpensive access to clean, drinkable, bacteria-free water. These are, it's a picture of, I got this off the web, of one of the few sets of George Washington's false teeth. And they are, as you learned, made of wood. Of course, they're 200-odd years old, so maybe they faded a little bit. But they probably looked something like that when they were in his mouth. It looks terribly uncomfortable. It looks like something the Spanish Inquisition would inflict upon someone. But this was George Washington. All of my grandparents are born in the 1900s, 1900, 1905, 1914, and 1917. They're all dead now. I knew them all. Not one of them, the most recent one died, the most recent death was 1996. Not one of my grandparents died with any more than 2 or 3 of their natural teeth in their mouth. They were all born and raised in New Orleans or in South Louisiana. So in America, they all lost their teeth. Dental hygiene was poor, both formal hygiene that you get at the dentist and the stuff that you could buy at the pharmacy and the supermarkets, flossing, effective toothpaste, good toothbrushes. Those things were not readily available. Capitalism makes those things available to us, keeps our mouths cleaner, keeps bacteria, it reduces the amount of bacteria in our mouths, enables us to keep our teeth longer than we otherwise could. The idea of someone living to he didn't die, he wasn't terribly old, but the idea of someone in the 18th century, even in a wealthy country like the United States, dying at George Washington's age, I believe he was 67, with a full set of healthy white teeth, I believe would have been unthinkable. So he famously wore dentures, which is why I pulled up his dentures. Here's a great anti-pollutant brought to you inexpensively by capitalism, a refrigerator freezer. Again, sort of a normal, everyday thing. We take it for granted, but the refrigeration, of course, dramatically reduces the growth of bacteria in food. And so it keeps our food cleaner. It keeps us protected better from many of the natural pollutants that would afflict and sometimes, many times, kill our pre-industrial ancestors. So not only is our food safer, we get to keep more of it. So food is less expensive because of that. We don't have to discard it as quickly as we otherwise would. Obviously, you freeze it here or refrigerate it there. It's a great anti-pollution device. Canning, industrial canning, yet another way to protect us from one of the worst pre-industrial pollutants, bacteria. Industrial canning dramatically reduces the growth of bacteria, enabling us to keep food safe and tasty much longer than otherwise. The can is an anti-pollution device. That's how I look at it, because that is what it is. It's also a nice storage device as well, but its chief function is to keep us free of the pollutants, many of the pollutants that afflicted our ancestors. Plastic, I won't recount for you all know or have heard of the famous scene in the Dustin Hoffman movie, The Graduate, and everyone's making fun of plastics. How bourgeois, how trite, how insignificant, how mean is plastic. All right. It's pretty non-porous. You can wrap food in it, helps keep the food fresher than otherwise, helps reduce the growth of bacteria when it's refrigerated, it keeps one type of food free of of being infected with what might be on another type of food sitting close by. It keeps us clean if we wear plastic as gloves. It's that's a plastic bag. I like this one because it shows something I'm fascinated with. The small accumulations of little innovations, so small that we ignore them, we don't recognize them even when they occur. When I was young, there was no such thing as a plastic bag that had a self-sealer on it. That came along a little bit later with the press seal. Now you have these plastic bags where it's even less trouble. You run this little device across the plastic bag and it seals it, keeping out, making it more or less airtight, more or less a better anti-pollution device. The light bulb, actually, take a good look at that because you won't be seeing it much longer. Not that kind, unfortunately. They're being legislated away in an attempt to save the planet from pollution. Yet the light bulb, the incandescent light bulb, has done enormous good in protecting human beings from the consequences of pollution. Prior to the light bulb, inside dwellings at night, or if they were lit at all, were lit with, depending on the time, tallow candles, kerosene lamps, other oil lamps, sometimes natural gas, all of which, some more than others, but all of which dispense more pollutants into the interior atmosphere than does the light bulb. The light bulb gives us reliable, good, steady light without emitting any pollutants at all into the immediate household. That was not true of forms of direct indoor lighting prior to the industrial age. I celebrate the light bulb as a great anti-pollutant. I thank Thomas Edison for helping make our interior environments much cleaner than those environments would otherwise be. Air conditioning. It's just the air conditioning units outside of my house. I've always found it ironic, this is neither here nor there, that air conditioning was invented in upstate New York, like one of the last places it really needed. I'm from New Orleans. It should have been invented in New Orleans because you really need it there, like 11 and a half months a year. And so air conditioning, of course, we don't even need the screen now because now you can keep the interior of your house. These are actually heat pumps, so keeps the interior of the house, the humidity down and the temperature down in the summer months. It keeps the heat up in the winter months. It's a way of keeping us cleaner. Yeah, it uses a lot of energy. It's powered by electricity. But whatever costs those electrical emissions, the emissions from producing electricity have on the environment, must be weighed against the great advantages that the air conditioning units have, the heat pump units have, in keeping our interiors much cleaner than they would otherwise be. I will say it because of where I am. It's not necessarily about being cleaned by capitalism, but air conditioning does have one enormous downside, and that is it keeps Washington in business year-round. Being built on a swamp, were it not for air conditioning, Washington would be largely empty of people in the summer months. Unfortunately, now it keeps just going and going and going. So we can count that against air conditioning, but I still like it. Plastic utensils. Another way that our lives are cleaned by capitalism. They're inexpensive plastic utensils. Use them once, throw them away. This is another sealing bag. I'm just sort of fascinated by these little inventions. You could buy, in the 1970s when I was growing up, celery in plastic bags. Now celery comes in self-sealable plastic bags. I just bought this in an ordinary supermarket, Kroger or Safeway. And it comes with this sealer, helping keep the celery just a little bit fresher, a little bit cleaner, a little bit less infected with bacteria than it otherwise might be. Paper towels. Yeah. The process for producing the paper in the pulp mills and the paper mills emit some pollutants into the atmosphere, but we get inexpensive paper towels to wipe up messes to help keep our interiors clean. We can use those things to spread disinfectants over the countertops to kill the bacteria that might be on the countertops. Raid. This is ant insecticide. There are other insecticides for other annoying creatures. Yet another device. I mean, I assume, my guess is that the typical so-called environmentalist really hates this stuff because it's made of chemicals and it's so unnatural. But we humans, I consider it to be an instance of pollution. If I'm living in a house that's crawling with ants and roaches and other insects that I prefer not to be around, this stuff helps me keep my house relatively free of those things. You can't tell what that is. This is a bottle of Cipro. This is antibiotics. This is one of the greatest anti-pollutants ever invented. It came to us in the 1940s. Of course, penicillin was the first successful antibiotic. Our ancestors, pre-industrial ancestors, were killed frequently, as I mentioned before, by bacteria. The industrial capitalist system that we have enables the production of inexpensive, safe antibiotics that dramatically reduce the dangers to us of bacteria should we ingest them, no matter how we ingest them. Other first aid antibacterial cleansers. This is an antibacterial ointment. Band-Aids, you don't think of that as an anti-pollutant. I do. You get a cut, you put a Band-Aid on it. I guess I should call it adhesive strip. You put a bandage on it. It's inexpensive. It helps protect your wound, your little wound, from infection from the outside. You get less polluted because of the Band-Aid. And you can put this nice antibacterial salve on it to further reduce the risks of infection. It keeps us cleaner, these products of capitalism, than we would otherwise be. I suffer terribly in the spring from allergies, from pollen allergies, and this is Flonase. It's a relatively small thing. My life would go on if it didn't exist, but it would be more miserable. So when the springtime comes, I go to my doctor. He prescribes Flonase. I shoot some of this stuff up my nose every day, and my nose is less polluted with pollen, or at least the consequences of the pollution to me are much less noticeable. My nose is cleaned by capitalism because some innovator came up with the chemical formula for Flonase, and we have enough wealth and industrial capacity to produce this stuff at low cost. Speaks for itself. That's a condom, cleaned by capitalism. The washer and dryer. Again, if you took the clothing that your pre-industrial ancestors wore, you stuck that in there, it would come out in shreds. We have machine-woven fabrics that we can stick in there. It washes it vigorously, cleans it beautifully. We can wear it over and over and over again. This is a way in which capitalism makes our micro-environments much less polluted than they would otherwise be. You can also, by the way, think of these as recycling machines. I was once asked by a student years ago if I recycle, and I said, no, I don't. And the student got angry with me, literally so angry, the student walked out of the room. I was guest lecturing, so I couldn't give him an F. But he walked out of the room, and then I was driving home. I was guest lecturing for my friend Dwight Lee at the University of Georgia. And I lived in Clemson, South Carolina at the time. I remember driving back to Clemson, and I was sort of disturbed by this experience. And then I realized I gave the guy the wrong answer. I do recycle. I recycle all the time. I don't recycle everything, But I recycle my clothes. In fact, the clothes I had on then were recycled. I don't wear clothes once and throw them away. I put them in these recycling machines. And they do a beautiful job of enabling me to reuse them over and over and over again. I live in a recycled house. The people who owned the house before I bought it, when they decided that they didn't need it or no longer want it, they didn't just discard it. They recycled. They spruced it up, sold it to my family and me. I have another store that I go to, a merchant, a recycling merchant, a dry cleaners. So if I'm wearing a suit or a sport coat, can't put it in there, I take it to this dry cleaning store. They recycle those things for me. So not only does capitalism keep our personal environments a lot cleaner, we actually recycle more than the typical environmentalist thinks we recycle. Oh, and on top, of course, we have inexpensive detergent that helps in the cleaning process. That's brought to you by industrial capitalism. It's one of my favorite. This is a breath mint. Small thing, but you put the breath mint in your mouth, and your mouth is a little bit less polluted, which comes in handy, I suppose, on dates and stuff like that. Right? It keeps your mouth a little bit less dirty, less foul, less offensive to people who encounter you. It's another recycling machine, also a clean by capitalism machine. This is a dishwasher. Well, you know how they work. You know what they do. You put the dishes in. You press a few buttons. A few minutes, hour or so later, your dishes are perfectly clean. But I think they get the dishes. It gets the dishes much cleaner than they would get if you wash them by hand, because it can wash at a much higher temperature than the human hand can stand for any length of time. So our dishes get really clean because of capitalism. This particular machine, by the way, helps protect from noise pollution. It's heavily insulated, so when it's running, you can barely hear it. Paid a little bit more for that, but it was certainly affordable. It's another product brought to you, another anti-pollution product brought to us by capitalism. A friend of mine sent this to me. He took this picture. This is a holy water dispenser in a Catholic church. I'm not religious, but I grew up Catholic, and I remember when my grandmother would take me to Mass when I was a young boy. We would dip our hands in this holy water thing and do the sign of the cross, and other people were dipping their hands in there. Right? I didn't think it's holy water. I guess God keeps it clean. Right? But just in case God's attention is diverted, apparently I'm not sure exactly how it works. This holy water dispenser gives out one squirt of holy water. Right? So you're not getting water that was touched by other people. Right? It's a small thing, but in this way, Roman Catholics are made cleaner by innovative capitalism. I'm getting into some less familiar things. I'm going to get back to some more familiar things in a moment. I like these a lot. I think they're interesting. These are shoe horns that plug into the wall. They're electric shoe horns. I'm not sure how they work, and I have to confess, I'm not even sure if they work. I suppose they do. But if you wear shoes, your feet are kind of dirty, right? They're full of bacteria, so the interior of your shoes get really dirty. You put those things in, you plug them in, and it uses some kind of ultraviolet infrared processing where it kills the bacteria in your shoes. So you keep your shoes clean. Innovative capitalism, making our personal lives cleaner. UV ray protected sunglasses. One of the pollutants for our eyes is UV rays. UV ray protective sunglasses came about, I believe, only in the early to mid 1980s. So sunglasses before were especially bad for your eyes because they help protect your eyes from the light. That let your pupil widen, which let in more UV rays, which would come right through the ordinary sunglasses. All sunglasses today, the most inexpensive pair, at least purchasable in the US, are UV protected. And so when you wear the sunglasses today, your eyes are protected from the pollution, eye-damaging pollution from the sun, even compared to having no sunglasses on at all with your pupil being dilated. You see these all around. I think I saw this. There's some back there. This is a hand sanitizing wipe. You have hand sanitizing lotions. So if you're worried about your hands being dirty, you can pick up the hand sanitizing wipe. This is free. This is outside of a Whole Foods in Northern Virginia. Just free. You walk outside, here's the hand sanitizing device. This is a keyless entry device for a car. So how is that cleaned by capitalism? Again, I'm talking about small things, but these small things add up. Well, if it's raining outside, right? In the old days, you had to fiddle for your keys, stick the key, find the keyhole while you're holding the umbrella and holding your groceries or holding your books, whatever you're holding. Twist the key and get in. You get much more wet, and it's particularly bad on really cold days. Or here, if it's raining, you press the button, the door's unlocked anyway. You can get in your car a little bit faster. I'm not saying it's a big thing, but it is a thing that keeps us just a little bit cleaner, a little bit more healthy because of innovative capitalism. That is asphalt. That's the street in front of my house. It's a small street. Asphalt is an incredible cleanser. It's made our lives a great deal cleaner because the alternative to asphalt or concrete in this case, asphalt or concrete, for streets was either cobblestone, which was expensive and rare and backbreaking. If you've ever ridden even in a modern automobile over a cobblestone street, it's really, really tough. Imagine riding over a cobblestone street in a wooden carriage. But the typical surface was dirt. And so you had city streets made of mud and dirt. Asphalt ended all that. So now when vehicles ride over the street, they don't dig these ruts. They don't dig those ruts. There's less places for mosquitoes and flies to nest. When you get out of your car, you walk on the street, your feet get less dirty because of it. It's not pretty. It's asphalt after all. No one would ever put it in a museum, an art museum, as an example of great capitalist beauty, but it is a great capitalist anti-pollutant. I forget the exact numbers, but they are huge. In New York City, just prior to the automobile, the number of horses that would die on the streets each day numbered in the dozens or maybe even hundreds. So every day you had horses dying on the street. So picture New York City before the automobile and before asphalt. Not that long ago. In fact, just a couple of decades ago, we could have said within the lifetime of people still alive. So you had New York City, or any city, I'm just picking New York because it's the big, great major metropolitan area in America. It had dirt streets. It had horses as the main mode of transportation. Horses have their own emission, of course. They attract flies, so that those emissions fall right into the mud. If it rains, it gets really slurry. If it's dry, it turns to dust and gets into your lungs. Asphalt reduces that. And then one of the greatest anti-pollution devices of all is the automobile. Because it does have emissions, that's true. But it does not have emissions of the sort that horses and other draft animals had, which were used prior to the invention and wide availability of the automobile. So being in a city today, even if it's full of traffic and all the engines are going, you are certainly breathing in perhaps some kinds of pollutants that you would not have breathed in 100 years earlier, 150 years earlier. But I suggest that your total exposure to pollution because of the automobile and because of asphalt is a great deal lower today than it was 100 or 150 years ago. We're lucky today. We're fortunate to be able to worry about the kinds of pollution we worry about. In my closing, I'm not going to get into you can probably imagine where I come down, but I'm not going to get into a discussion of the merits of worrying about climate change, the merits of worrying about species loss, the merits of worrying about sulfur dioxide, pollutants. Whatever the merits of those arguments are or are not, we're fortunate today that that's the kind of pollution we have to worry about. Those are macro level pollutants. Their consequences, their ill consequences, if there are ill consequences, are distant. They're speculative, much more speculative than the kinds of pollutants that are wiped out by the things that I showed you here today. And so one of the great ironies of capitalist development is that it has cleared the way for environmentalists to worry about the sorts of things that they worry about. Again, we can save for another day the debate on whether or not those worries are worthwhile, whether or not it's worthwhile to expend energy on concerns over those kinds of pollutions and over climate change. But I would suggest, even in the worst case scenario, the capitalism and the industrial processes that have brought us the kinds of pollution that environmentalists are most concerned about today, that process has brought us these things and many others that have made our private lives, our individual microenvironments, much cleaner than they otherwise would have been. It has saved our lives, it has extended our lives, it has made our lives more pleasant and more clean and less perilous. Maybe one of the prices that we're paying is this form of speculative pollution such as anthropomorphic, or whatever the term is, climate change, sulfur dioxide pollutants, acid rain, you name the kind of pollution that has been of concern to modern environmentalists. And I think for all of them I can say, well, whatever its reality, I think the upside of the processes from which those pollutants came is huge, and it's largely ignored. These are just some photographs of things, and I just took them with my cell phone, of products that we take for granted. Most of these, some exceptions like the ultraviolet shoehorns, but the vast majority of the things I've shown you this evening are ordinary, common, we take them for granted. And it's precisely because they're ordinary and common, we take them for granted, that most people don't think of them as things that not only are convenient, but things that make our world cleaner and keep us less polluted. And if you're, at least if you're like me, once you recognize that the ubiquity of these kinds of things that make our world cleaner, you see it all around you. I have this little meme in my head, clean by capitalism. And almost everything I see, I'm probably going overboard, everything I see is, oh, clean by capitalism, clean by capitalism. Concrete floors, hardwood floors. Our pre-industrial ancestors they slept on dirt floors, maybe had straw put over the dirt. We have hard floors. Yet another way in which capitalism keeps us cleaner. I think I have maybe 5 or 10 minutes for questions. I thank you for your rapt and clean attention. So.
When you talked about the screens, I flashed to there was a Broadway musical, 1776.
Yep.
There was a song in there about that. You
Yep.
know, someone open up a window.
Yep.
Too many flies. Too many flies.
Yeah, I remember it well. That's right. That was one of the opening things. In fact, that reminds me. I like. How many of you have been to Williamsburg, Colonial Williamsburg? I like it. It's fun. It's interesting. But as I've grown older, I dislike it more and more. And I dislike it because, in a way, it sends out the wrong message. It teaches something about colonial life. You can see a little bit how the cooper made the barrels. Okay. But our colonial ancestors in the real Williamsburg of, say, 1760, their clothes were not as clean as the reenactors' clothes are today. The food was not as fresh as is the food you can get in the King's Inn or King's Arms Tavern today. If you go to Williamsburg in the summer, you have air conditioning in the ye olde Cooper shop. Right? They didn't have air conditioning back then. And they had a mud street. They had a dirt street in which horses pulled wooden wagons. I mean, the wheels were probably rimmed with metal, but still, you had flies, you had dirt. The real colonial Williamsburg was much, much dirtier. When I was younger, before I started thinking about these things, I always thought, boy, it'd be really nice to live in the colonial era. And now I never think that, because the colonial. I'm sure if I would transport to the colonial era, after about 10 minutes, I would scream to come back to the 21st century, because things would be so filthy, uncomfortable, unsanitary compared to today. And I think Williamsburg, for all of whatever other benefits it has and whatever entertainment benefits it gives, does cast a kind of unrealistic light on the past. It wasn't that clean. It wasn't that lovely. It was, in fact, much harder and much dirtier and much less pleasant than you would know by visiting Williamsburg today. Williamsburg is like a Disney World of history.
Hey, I just want to point out that even the camera and the digital photography that you're using to capture these cleaned by capitalism images was cleaned by capitalism. Just a couple decades ago, you would have had to use all kinds of chemicals and hazardous chemicals to develop these very pictures that you're showing. But let's come full circle and go back to your students who think capitalism pollutes our world, not cleans it. When you present it, what's the reception you get among the 18-year-old demographic?
I've actually never given them a full presentation such as this. I've just done it a little bit in words, and you know, sort of a very small summary. Maybe I should try to do that. My guess is that they would be most of them would not be very receptive, at least at first. I think what they would say is, oh, well, look, you're not talking about the kind of pollutants that we're talking about. And I would say, well, that's right. But then I would say to them, again, I'm repeating myself now, but if you lived back then in the pre-industrial age, where there was no carbon emissions to promote global warming, no sulfur dioxide pollutants, no chemical emissions into any waterway, no industrial chemical emissions in any waterway ever, right? You would be concerned with a whole bunch of pollutants that you don't have to be concerned with today. Capitalism has saved you from that concern, and that is a good thing, and it's a good thing that you, as a student, ignore because it's so common. And the whole point of this kind of presentation is to bring out that reality, to make palpable something that we overlook because it's so much a part of our everyday life. Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Don Boudreaux.